Boris Johnson has urged Brits to follow the government's advice to steer clear of pubs and work from home, saying the adherence to strict new rules could send COVID-19 packing in just 3 months.
I do think, looking at it all, that we can turn the tide within the next 12 weeks, and I'm absolutely confident that we can send a coronavirus packing in this country, but only if we take the steps, we all take the steps that we have outlined.
I'm Max Molyneux, and this is the latest on coronavirus. More measures to tackle COVID-19 have been introduced in London, as 40 tube stations closed and 20,000 troops were put at the ready to help support vital public services like the NHS. The servicemen and women are preparing to join the fight against the virus, with plans for the armed forces to take over hotels and run them as hospitals to help treat London's escalating coronavirus caseload. With more than 40% of Britain's cases and the majority of the country's deaths, the capital's streets and transport network have gone eerily quiet as people heeded the PM's advice to avoid public spaces and work from home where possible. London's transport network has been drastically scaled back. Along with the closure of 40 underground stations, weekend night services on tube and overground trains are to cease, and bus timetables have been reduced. Today, the government also introduced emergency legislation aimed at tackling the spread of the virus.
So they're going to be able to shut down airports, they're going to be able to shut down ports. If someone's suspected of having coronavirus, they're going to be able to arrest them. Newly retired doctors or medical students or even recently retired social workers will be able to come back and practice because there could be shortages, and it's an all hands on deck approach to dealing with this. The courts are going to rely more on video link and audio link, which traditionally they do when someone's already detained in prison for a serious crime. That will be more widespread. Also in food, food companies are going to have to update the government on how much food they have. There's no real issue with food supply. I mean, we make so much of our own produce here. The panic buying is just panic buying. There's no logic behind it. But food companies are still going to have to tell the government how much they've got, and that will be something that they are, in legislation, they have to do. They're going to change how they handle funerals as well. So if someone dies, rather than have all the paperwork that's usually involved, they're going to kind of cut that down a bit so it's easier to go through the process of dealing with a body. And I think local councils will be given more power to deal with that, because there are concerns that the number of dead could outweigh the capacity that they're capable of dealing with, so they'll have complete control over how to handle it.
The emergency coronavirus bill will be time limited to 2 years, with not all of these measures necessarily being enforced.
Health Secretary Matt Hancock said this week that the things they're allowed to do now, they'll only use them if they are absolutely necessary. So not everything in the emergency coronavirus bill will we see.
As well as the drastic social distancing measures, the PM has announced that from Friday, all schools will close for the majority of pupils.
After schools shut their gates from Friday afternoon, they will remain closed for most pupils, for the vast majority of pupils, until further notice. And I'll explain what I mean by the vast majority of pupils. The objective is to slow the spread of the virus, and as I say, we judge that this is the right moment to do that.
Schools will remain open for children of key workers, such as those in the NHS, police officers and delivery drivers. And although it may be music to the ears for many pupils, the announcement has students facing an uncertain future as the UK education system sails into uncharted territory.
I mean, it's completely unprecedented that we have had a blanket school closure in this country. So for many students, they're going to be finding themselves at home, potentially isolated from their peer groups. For children who are planning to take their exams this year, then that is a massive disruptor to them. And I think they'll all be anxious to know what plans the government will have to award them a final grade.
Natalie Pereira is the Chief Executive of the Education Policy Institute.
Before that, I worked as a civil servant, mostly in the Department for Education, where I was there for about 12 years or so. And I am also a school governor as well. I think on balance, it is the right decision, and indeed it has come later than other countries have in terms of when they've closed their schools.
GCSEs and A-level exams that were meant to take place in May and June have been cancelled.
We would hope that the government would find a way of awarding grades with minimal disruption and impact on pupil plans and outcomes. It's looking likely that they will introduce a policy which will take into account the students' predicted grades and also an assessment taken by the teacher. But again, making sure that that's really fair is going to be tough, because some students may have really improved since over the last term. And so making sure that teachers are genuinely able to take account of that, and that we still see a sort of reasonable distribution of grades across this cohort will be really tough. Our biggest concern is for vulnerable and poor pupils who don't necessarily have books in their home. They don't necessarily have access to the internet or indeed their own computer or laptop. And they might just not have the physical space to be able to learn for this period of time.
Is the education system prepared to handle this kind of long-term disruptions?
It's all really unknown, and I don't think the education system is prepared, but it needs to now galvanise itself and get prepared. So whether that's by delivering online classes over time, and if this carries on for a long period of time, or whether it's by making sure that there's regular communication with parents about what children should be doing at home. But I certainly don't think the system is prepared at the moment.
But it's not all bad news. On Wednesday, Boris Johnson and his team of scientific advisors announced that rapid progress is being made on a game-changing test to determine who has contracted the virus but has since recovered or has never shown symptoms at all.
It is a game changer, and the reason it's a game changer is that it allows you to understand the proportion of the asymptomatic population who's had this disease but hasn't had symptoms that are in any way significant.
The thing about this disease, it's an invisible enemy, and we don't know who's transmitting it. But the great thing about having a test to see whether you've had it or not is suddenly, a green light goes on above your head. You can go back to work in the safe and confident in the knowledge that you're most unlikely to get it again. So from an economic point of view, from a social point of view, as Sir Patrick says, it really could be a game changer.
Not only does it tell you that you've been infected and been exposed to the virus, it might be able to tell you who's safe to return into the community because they should be resistant or protected from subsequent infection. Now that's still something that we need to get a better handle on. Just because you have antibodies doesn't necessarily mean that you're infected or protected, but let's hope that that we will be able to at some point to work out whether or not a particular level of antibody, for example, is associated with protection from virus. So it's still early days, but it's certainly, it will be a big game changer.
Until then, Brits are being urged through daily press briefings and a brand new TV ad campaign to protect the elderly and vulnerable by self-isolating and practicing social distancing measures. At the moment, our only defence is against COVID-19.
Protect yourself, protect others, protect the NHS.
But if you wanted something a little more upbeat to tune into while you're at home, celebrities have been playing gigs over Instagram Live. It might not be the main stage at Glastonbury, but at least you're guaranteed not to get wet.